So our first speaker heads up Fortnum Mason, a true British heritage brand known for its gourmet groceries and posh preserves. To tell us how he's leading the company into the future, please welcome up Tom Athron. First of all, Tom, a huge welcome. Thank you so much for your time today. It's lovely to have you here.
Lovely to be here. Thanks, Kate.
So before joining Fortnum's, you were CFO at Waitrose, Group Development Director at the John Lewis Partnership, and COO of Matches Fashion. Tell us a little bit about how those roles prepared you for the top job at Fortnum Mason.
So thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here. An amazing group of people, by the way. I guess the short answer to that would be that it's a combination of food and retailing and digital and luxury all coming together. So when the phone rang for that job offer, it felt a very natural thing for me to go and try. I have to say, I spent a bit of time in fashion with Matches Fashion. I much prefer food.
Right.
I got a bit bored of walking into the office and people at Matches and people going like this every day.
They weren't impressed.
I know it's Bowden again. I'm really sorry. It all rather sort of came together. I guess it wasn't part of a big sort of master plan or anything, but the John Lewis Partnership felt like it was an amazing business. In fact, it still is an amazing business. And it gave me opportunities that I probably would never have had anywhere else. If you were interested in having a career which sort of zigzagged your way through the business, the whole organisation, and you were up for being put into challenging spots and stretching roles in a way that, in some instances, the jobs that I was given at JLP were, I was wholly unsuited to them. But they gave me an opportunity so they just basically put you in a position where they would never let you fail. Yeah. And that gave me a career for which I will always be forever thankful, I have to admit. I absolutely loved it. And of course, I left with friends for life.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed that. I then ended up, I love my time at Waitrose, which is a properly foodie business. Yes, it's a grocer, and yes, it occupies a certain position in that particular industry. And goodness me, we had so much fun and we grew a lot, and I learned a lot about brand, and I learned a lot about how to get things done in a business which is very, very large, and it sort of sometimes feels like you're steering an ocean-going tanker rather than a sort of a nimble speedboat. But I learned a lot about food, and I think that was just fantastic, and it instilled a real love for me, actually, which I very much brought into Fortnum's. And then Matches was very modern, very digital, very luxury, completely different, hugely entrepreneurial. And again, I think the other thing that being at Matches did, I would say, is that it sort of recalibrated me from being in a huge business to working in a very, very small one. And actually what you realise is that it's just as hard to get things done in small businesses as it is big businesses, but the numbers have fewer noughts on, and that's sort of pretty much it.
So then when you took on that CEO position at Fortnum Mason, it was December 2020, so right in the midst of the pandemic. What were some of the sort of biggest leadership lessons that you learned in that first year in the role?
So I think, two things. I think on my first day, literally my first day, we were going into, I don't know if you remember all those tiered lockdowns, where the world was sort of closing down quite slowly as we got closer and closer to Christmas. And actually, I overlapped with my predecessor, who'd done an amazing job for the previous 7 years at Fortnum's. And I actually took over in anger on the 1st of January, so just after Christmas. And I walked in, and on my first day, the guy who runs the Piccadilly store said to me, "We're going to have to close." We were allowed to be open because we were a food business, serving the good people of Mayfair and St James's. And he said, "We're going to have to close because 60% of our team are either ill or self-isolating, and we're not going to be able to remain open." And I said, he said, "But what we'll do is we'll close for 2 weeks, everyone will get better, and then we'll reopen again." And I remember thinking, I'm not sure that's the way it's going to work. And I could see the charts on the news every night only going in one direction. And if you remember, it was the beginning of that lockdown that started in January and basically lasted until June. If you were a hospitality business, you weren't open until June. And so I went upstairs and I phoned my old boss, actually, from Waitrose, a guy called Mark Price, who I said to him, I need some advice.
What would you do?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, he said, I thought you might call for some advice, but not before 9 o'clock on your first morning. And he said, it doesn't matter, just make a decision in 10 minutes, which I thought was really good advice, actually. And so we ended up keeping open, and I'm really pleased that we did. So my first lesson, long answer to your question, is there's something about decisiveness that really makes a difference for people. Like, be really clear and decisive. And the truth is that if you can just get more decisions right than wrong, you'll probably do okay on balance.
Just take action.
Just take action, yeah. It's so valuable to people, but don't dither. It's a complete nightmare. And then I suppose there were a couple of other things. I did really want Fortnum. My sort of observation of Fortnum's when I joined was that we'd done an amazing job with the brand, but there was a gap that was beginning to open up between the experience of our customers and the strength of the brand, and that sort of worried me, actually. And this was my pitch when I went for the job. I sort of described this gap, and so what I did, and again, this wasn't sort of, I didn't think too hard about this, but we had been in the paper in December for not delivering hampers on time. And I remember my mother called me. I'd only been there for about a week. And my mother called me and said, "You screwed it up already." And basically, what I did is I asked for the top 10 things that customers were complaining about over the last 6 months. And then we cancelled the whole of the transformation program. And we said, right, we're going to take each of those 10 things and fix them at their roots. We're going to go right back to the root causes, not put sticking tape and plaster over them, but right back to their root causes and try and work out how we're going to fix them. And that was, I have to say, that was an amazing thing. I'm so pleased I did it. I mean, it didn't feel quite so significant at the time, but I look back and it did a couple of things. First of all, it put customers right at the top of our agenda, which I don't think we'd had. I think we'd had brand at the top of our agenda. And secondly, it meant that the following Christmas we were able to trade much, much better. So I'm really pleased that we did that. And then the last thing I would say, and again, this is very much with hindsight, is that we as a team tried to answer some of those big existential questions about what we wanted Fortnum's to be, because of course, you know, I look around the world and department stores are dying. Food retail operates on incredibly thin margins. Luxury was going through a sort of a, you know, you couldn't decide whether it was going brilliantly or not so brilliantly for people. You know, was it the end, through the pandemic, was it the end of physical retailing, which some people were saying, and the whole world was going to go online? Big existential questions for us. And we basically decided, seems really simple now, that we just wanted to be all about extraordinary food and drink. So we started to look at everything through that lens, and then you begin to sort of say, well, why are we in menswear? Why are we doing sort of the... And I recognise that not everything can be extraordinary food and drink, but once you start to look through something through at all your questions or the big decisions you've got to make through a really single, sort of simple, unifying thought, life becomes quite easy, and then we started to make changes. Yeah,
and you had quite a strong sort of strategy and mission, which was to become more relevant to more people more often. So talk us through some of those ways that you have modernised Fortnum's, but while maintaining its rich heritage.
So more relevant to more people more often, and again, that was something I inherited, but I really liked. It would just sort of come into the vernacular over the course of the previous year or so. But I really liked it as a sort of I guess the basis for our customer strategy as much as anything else. And the reason I really liked it was because I felt that we were a business that was not known for extraordinary food and drink. We were known for Christmas. And it basically meant that we were making all our money at Christmas, and for the rest of the year didn't make any money at all. And I just felt that we were missing a massive trick there. Not only does becoming bigger and bigger at Christmas become operationally very challenging, but actually there was a whole load of things that we were doing brilliantly that customers just didn't know about. So we were trying to find a way. I really like this idea of relevance. Funny enough, we talk about relevance and not modernity. So I never want Fortnum's to be modern, but I do want it to be contemporary and relevant and up-to-date and forward-looking and sort of like zeitgeisty, I suppose, as much as anything else, of the moment. And I felt that we had work to do in that respect. So we did a number of things. What we recognised was that our online business was a real source of growth. It was a real engine for growth, specifically customer acquisition, actually, and specifically then for people who didn't have access to Piccadilly or any of our satellite shops sort of every day. But we recognise that there's a story, there are moments of joy and celebration all the way through the year. You don't have to wait for Christmas. And so we started to talk about the quality of our food. And actually, there should be nothing stopping everyone in this room, by the way, drinking Fortnum's tea. You really should be. It is fabulous. Or marmalade, or our biscuits. Feel free. But the only way you can make that work is if you start talking about the quality of your food and to make it relevant at moments outside Christmas. So we started to really push that through our online business. And actually, again, the one thing that the pandemic did was push all of our business online. And what we've been able to do is hold on to the customers that we've acquired during that period and then serve them better. So and then we've got a couple of other sort of ideas coming up over the next 12 months, which I think are going to reinforce that further. Yeah, because in terms of online sales, I think it's about 30% of revenues come from online customers now, compared to about 10% pre-pandemic. Yeah, it was about 7 actually, but yes, so really significant change. And you said that's hugely important for new customers and acquisition, but what are you doing to retain those customers and really build loyalty with them? So some of the things that we do online, you'll see very directly tie back into store. So I never, what I really want customers to do is come to Piccadilly, right? Because it is amazing. It's a destination in itself, isn't it? And it's unique. It's unique globally, and it's like a feast for the senses. I mean, you walk in and you just can't help but smile. And we make decisions about our store fit out that you would never in a million years normally. We have a velvet handrail that goes up the staircase. I mean, it's like no one would ever do that. Yeah. And yet we did it, and it's just stunning. So there's joy in not just in what you see or what you taste or what you smell or it's everything you touch as well. And so what I really want people to do is come to Fortnum's. We got rid of menswear, as I was saying earlier, and I'm really pleased we did that actually. And instead, we've put in a food and drink studio, which is this space on our 3rd floor, which is glassed off. There's a proper kitchen at one end. We have 100 chefs who work in our building, 100. And so this was an opportunity for them to come out from behind the walls, showcase what they're brilliant at. People love. We got the idea from the chefs in the windows in Bon Marché in Paris. When you walk past and they're piping macarons in their big toques. Yeah. We need to do a bit of that. So we do all mise en place for the tea salon now in the food and drink studio. So you can see people dipping choux and making Scotch eggs and things. And then at lunchtime we'll do this sort of thing. We'll do in conversations with and master classes and then in the evenings we'll do supper clubs and dinner parties and chefs' tables. There's a supper club tonight. Pierre Kaufman's coming to cook. About 40 people. People have bought tickets, and it just brings the whole place to life. We've opened a gin still. We've got a cocktail bar which is made out of sugar up there. It's amazing. We've got the most amazing cooks a cook shop offer, which is stunning, where nearly everything that's in there is made in the UK, and half of it is made by individual craftsmen. So it's really trying to tell a story around food. That's what we've used the space for. And if you look at what we're trying to do online, a lot of that points back to the experience of Piccadilly. Yeah, because I know social media is very big for you now, and especially in terms of attracting a sort of new generation of shoppers. Can you talk us through some recent initiatives? Well, yes. I mean, social is really big for us. It's interesting, because if you look at it through I suspect there'll be a range of views in the room about this, but if you look at social media through sort of traditional marketing lenses in terms of cost of acquisition and conversion and all the rest of it, you could convince yourself very quickly that it's a complete waste of money. But it's much more nuanced than that. I think A, it taps you into a new audience. I agree with you. I think B, the value comes back to you in ways that you don't expect, and you sort of have to take a bit of a leap of faith. But what we like doing is talking about some of our amazing collaborations online. On social. There's an amazing baker in Leeds called Rich Meyer, who has this bakery, has this social brand called Get Baked. And we said we quite like to put to the point about sort of tradition and modernity, that there's quite a lot of space, I think, in the Fortnum's brand for a bit of tension. Right, and so teaming up with people who are fundamentally unexpected it works really well for us. We've really noticed that. Get Baked is a really good example. Very, very young, very sort of fanatical audience about these extraordinary cakes that he makes, which are 24 layers of sponge and ganache. Amazing, actually. They're extraordinary cakes. We did a collaboration with him where we sell his cakes in slices, and you can buy the whole cake actually for 170 quid in London. And we don't open until 10 in the morning, and we had a queue outside going all the way around to Jermyn Street at 7:45. It was extraordinary, and it opened up a whole new audience for us. Supper clubs is a similar thing, actually. That brings in a whole new range of people who come in ones and twos, and they want to talk about food. And we get, a chef in, and then we get someone from the food broadcasting community. So someone like, I don't know, Layla Kazim or someone will come in and interview a really cool chef who will be like the latest big thing. And I remember one of the first ones we did Dan McGeorge came from up in the Lake District. He came from Rothay Manor. And his first course was a Korean chicken wing. And I can feel myself salivating as I think about it. It was unbelievable. And we had 100 people on our restaurant on the ground floor of Fortnum's, all like sub 30, all eating chicken with their fingers. And I remember thinking, this is what I want Fortnum's to be.
Yeah.
I want us to be all... And the only reason it worked was because it was extraordinary. Right? Not because it was average, but because it was totally extraordinary. And so the Get Baked thing, the supper clubs, that's bringing a whole new audience in, which is working really well for us.
Yeah, I love it. It's all about delighting people, those unexpected, surprising partnerships and collaborations. You've talked a lot about the opportunities and where you're taking Fortnum's. What about the biggest challenges? What is it right now that's keeping you awake at night?
So probably two things. I always worry about the quality of the food, always. And the only reason I only say that because so you don't have to, rather than because the quality isn't good enough. Just to be clear, it needs to be. I always think that Fortnum's food needs to justify the label. Mm-hmm. In other words, you can never have a product where the label is justifying the food, ever. It has to be the other way around. So it has to stand up to having the Fortnum's name on the label. That's the way I think about it. So that, I worry about that a lot. Funnily enough, when I first joined, I was worried about it then, actually, and we brought on a buying and merchandising director, for someone who does all our buying for food. And I sent him a hamper to say, congratulations on well done for getting the job. And he, instead of writing me a thank you letter, he wrote me a note saying that the shortbread was overbaked. And I remember thinking, that's exactly why you're coming. It's exactly why you're here. And so we've put a lot of effort into really improving the quality of it. It needs to be the best, like totally the best. And then I suppose the other thing I worry about is growth. But when I say that, I think what I mean is, we're very lucky in the sense that there are lots of opportunities for our brand to grow, lots. And the trick for us as a team is I think there are good growth opportunities and bad growth opportunities. In other words, I could list Fortnum's product on Ocado or Amazon and probably double the size of the business in about 18 months.
But is it right for the business?
It would be the wrong thing to do. Whereas, what I'm really looking for is the really high quality growth opportunities that allow us to, make the numbers that we need to sort of, finance our own growth and spin off the cash that allows us to reinvest back into the proposition and all of those sorts of things. But what I want is those growth opportunities to strengthen the brand and not trade off it. I think that they're probably the two things I worry about.
Great, thank you, Tom. Any questions from the audience?
So you talked a lot about the sort of multisensory aspect of the store, but then obviously food is very multisensory, emotional and intimate. But how do you put all of your senses, emotions and intimacy on the online channels so you can engross everyone in that beauty of the food and the passion that you clearly have?
It's really hard. It is really hard. You'll see a lot of it in our copy. Our production values when it comes to photography, which we use across everything that we do, whether it's Christmas brochures or whatever. We use the best food photographers, and I pick out in particular David Loftus, who is just extraordinary and in fact world-renowned. He does a lot of our food photography, and I'm really pleased that he does. But it's a really hard thing to do. And the truth is, I don't think that our online offer should try to be ever like walking into Fortnum's on Piccadilly. And I would say the same, by the way, about our little shops. We have one at Terminal 5 at Heathrow. We have one at St Pancras. We've got one in the Royal Exchange. And of course, they're all gorgeous and beautiful. And the people in there are wonderful. And we have a shop and a restaurant in Hong Kong. We have a number of shops in Japan and in Korea. And we're available in a number of places in the US. But the way I get my head around it is that it's like I don't bother trying to be like Piccadilly. What I really want all of those things to do is be a signpost. And so, yes, you can have access to the brand, whether you're in the US or the EU or Korea or wherever. But when you come to London, you're like, I have to go to Piccadilly. I have to go to Fortnum's. And so that's the way I think about it. We get asked a lot if I want to open do we want to open a flagship shop on Fifth Avenue in New York, right? And, we could do, but it'll never be, if it tries to be Piccadilly, it'll fail. So we're better off giving people small, preferably financially viable, standalone sort of snapshots of the brand, but use them as a signpost back to our flagship. That's the way I think that's the way we like to think about it.